The music stopped. The church doors burst open. SWAT storms in, arrest the bride. My father stood, grinning. Did you really think you could outsmart me? But he didn't know. The command word, hidden in my bouquet. The white roses in my hands were trembling. Not because I was nervous about getting married. Not because 300 guests were staring at me from polished oak pews. Not because the cathedral's golden light was catching the diamonds sewn into my veil, making me look like something out of a fairy tale. They were trembling because tucked between the stems, wrapped in a single layer of waterproof silk, was a USB drive containing classified intelligence that could bring down the most powerful man in the room. My father, Admiral Hargrove Scott, decorated war hero, national icon, the man who had sold military secrets to foreign operatives for 11 years while wearing his medals to congressional hearings and shaking hands with presidents. And today, my wedding day, was the day it all ended. My name is Emily Scott, Lieutenant Commander, United States Navy Intelligence, and I had spent the last 3 years of my life becoming the perfect trap. 6 months earlier. You're asking me to go undercover as myself, I had said flatly, sitting across from Director Callahan in the basement of Naval Intelligence Headquarters. The fluorescent lights hummed above us. My coffee had gone cold. We're asking you to go home, he corrected, sliding a manila folder across the table. Your father trusts you. He's the only one who still does. Every other operative we've placed near him has either disappeared or been turned. I opened the folder. Photographs, wire transfers, satellite images. A spreadsheet of names, Navy personnel, CIA contacts, foreign handlers, all connected to one man by thin red lines like a spider's web made of treason. My father's web. He's planning something large, Callahan continued. The command protocol, we believe it's a trigger phrase that activates a sleeper network. 12 agents embedded across 6 branches of government. Once activated, they execute simultaneously. We're talking about the largest coordinated intelligence breach in American history. And you think he'll give me the phrase? We think he already has. You just don't know it yet. Callahan leaned forward. Emily, he's been conditioning you your entire life. The phrases he used when you were a child. The games he played. The words he made you memorize. We believe the command word has been embedded in your memory for years, hidden in plain sight. I stared at him for a long moment. You want me to figure out what he planted in my own head. We want you to get close enough to confirm it, and when he activates the protocol, we want you in position to stop it. I closed the folder, looked at the photograph of my father on the cover page, tall, silver-haired, jaw like a warship's hull, eyes like the deep Atlantic. The man who had taught me to sail, who had pinned my first lieutenant's bar onto my uniform himself, his eyes shining with what I had believed was pride. How long do I have? He's been accelerating the timeline. We think 6 months, maybe less. I picked up my cold coffee and drank it anyway. Then I'd better plan a wedding. The groom asterisk. His name was Daniel Reeves. Brilliant, charming, third-generation Navy from a family that had bled blue and gold for decades. My father had introduced us at a benefit dinner 18 months ago, watching with barely concealed satisfaction as Daniel turned his smile on me like a spotlight. What my father didn't know was that Daniel was one of ours. Deep cover, 3 years embedded in my father's social circle, cultivating trust, collecting fragments. He was the best intelligence officer I had ever worked with, and somewhere between rehearsing our fabricated love story and actually spending every day in each other's presence, something real had begun to grow beneath the performance. We never spoke about it. There was no room for it, not yet. You ready? He murmured to me on the morning of the wedding, adjusting his dress uniform in the mirror of the vestibule. He looked exactly like the kind of man a woman would give everything to marry. I've been ready for 3 years, I said. He turned and looked at me, really looked at me, past the veil and the white silk dress and the carefully constructed fiction of this day. His eyes said everything we weren't allowed to say out loud. Emily, just my name, but the way he said it held a whole conversation. "I know," I whispered back. "After." He nodded once, squared his shoulders, became Daniel Reeves' besotted groom again. I turned back to my bouquet and slipped my fingers between the stems, feeling the small, hard edge of the USB drive. The drive contained a secondary package, a decryption key linked to the classified recordings I had spent 6 months gathering. Meetings, phone calls. My father's voice, careful and precise, moving pieces across a board only he could see. But the drive alone wasn't enough. We needed the command word. And the only person who could give it to me was the man about to walk me down the aisle. The walk. He was waiting for me at the cathedral doors. Admiral Hargrove Scott in full dress uniform, every medal in perfect alignment, his posture so straight it looked architectural. When he saw me, his face did something complicated, genuine emotion, moving beneath the calculated surface like something alive under ice. "You look like your mother," he said quietly. It nearly broke me. Because once, a long time ago, he had been a different man. Or maybe he had always been this man and I had simply loved an idea of him. I no longer knew which was true. "Thank you, Dad," I said and took his arm. We began to walk. The organ music swelled. The congregation rose. 300 people watched Admiral Scott escort his daughter toward her future, and every single one of them saw a proud father fulfilling the most sacred duty of fatherhood. I was counting steps, 62 from the doors to the altar. I needed him to speak before we reached 40. "I'm glad you chose Daniel," my father said, his voice low beneath the music. "He's exactly the kind of man I always wanted for you." "You always did have good judgment," I said carefully. He smiled. "I had excellent teachers. Do you remember what I used to tell you, when you were small and frightened of the dark?" My heart rate spiked. I kept my face perfectly still. "You told me many things," I said. "I told you that darkness isn't something to fear. It's simply a place where the right words hold more power." He patted my hand on his arm. "I always believed you understood that better than anyone, Emily, even when you were 6 years old and I first taught you the old sailor's phrase." 31 steps. The old sailor's phrase. I repeated softly, prompting him. He looked straight ahead at the altar, at Daniel waiting there, at the priest in white vestments, at the illusion of a perfect American wedding. "Anchor holds at midnight," he murmured, just that, quiet as a breath. And something detonated in my memory. I was 6 years old, sitting on the edge of my bed in the dark, and my father's voice was saying those exact words, low and rhythmic, the way other fathers said prayers. "Anchor holds at midnight, little sailor. Remember it always." Those are the words that matter most when the storm is worst. I had thought it was comfort. It was a key. 20 steps to the altar. 19, 18. My thumb moved beneath the bouquet and pressed the concealed button on the USB drive. Once, twice, 3 times in sequence. The signal transmission that would tell the team outside, "I have it. Stand by." The arrest. We were 7 steps from the altar when the cathedral doors burst open. The sound was enormous, ancient wood slamming against stone, a crack like a thunderclap that silenced the organ instantly and turned every head in the congregation. For one suspended moment, the entire world seemed to hold its breath. Then the SWAT team poured in. 12 officers in full tactical gear, moving with the controlled precision of people who have rehearsed an operation until it lives in their muscles. They spread through the nave in a practiced pattern, and the lead officer's voice rang off the vaulted ceiling like a bell. "Naval intelligence. Nobody move. Ma'am, Lieutenant Commander SCOTT, step away from the subject." 300 guests erupted, screaming, standing, surging backward in confusion and terror. The priest stumbled away from the altar. A bridesmaid fainted. And my father, Admiral Hargrove Scott, decorated war hero, national icon, traitor, did something I had not anticipated. He laughed. It was a short, quiet laugh, almost gentle, as if he were watching a chess opponent make a move he had predicted hours ago. He released my arm slowly, deliberately, and turned to face the approaching officers with the serenity of a man who has never once believed he could lose. "Emily," he said, still looking at the officers, his voice perfectly calm. "Did you really think I didn't know?" The room seemed to tilt. "Drop the bouquet," he continued. "Whatever you've hidden in it won't matter. The drive is encrypted to a secondary key that only I possess. Without it, everything you've recorded is noise. And the network," he smiled, and it was the most frightening thing I had ever seen on a human face, anchor holds at midnight. "You heard me say it. But did you think I'd say it to you, of all people, if I hadn't already accounted for this moment?" The SWAT team had reached us. The lead officer positioned himself between me and my father, one hand raised toward the Admiral. "Sir, you need to come with us." "In a moment," my father said pleasantly. Then to me, "The phrase activates the network, yes, but it requires confirmation from a secondary voice, mine, and I have never, not once, spoken it into any recording device." He tilted his head. "You have a beautiful wedding, sweetheart. I'm sorry it had to be this." The silence in the cathedral was absolute. I looked at my father, at the certainty in his eyes, at 11 years of careful, patient, brilliant deception looking back at me from behind the face of the man who had raised me. And then I smiled, because he was right about almost everything. The drive in my bouquet wasn't a decryption key. It was a transmitter. What he didn't know. "Dad," I said quietly, "do you remember what you taught me about misdirection?" Something shifted in his expression, the first hairline fracture. "You told me that the best operation never shows its real objective, that the thing your opponent is watching is never the thing that matters." I held up the bouquet. "You're watching the drive." Behind him, Daniel had moved away from the altar. He was no longer standing with the stillness of a waiting groom. He had his phone to his ear, and his voice, when he spoke, was not the voice of a besotted fiancé. "Confirmation received," Daniel said crisply into the phone. "Voice print authenticated, run it." My father turned slowly. "The cathedral has been wired for sound since yesterday morning," I said. "Every word spoken in this building has been recorded and transmitted in real time to naval intelligence servers, including everything you just said to me." I held his gaze. "Including asterisk anchor holds at midnight, spoken by Admiral Hargrove Scott in his own voice, confirming the activation phrase on federal record." He said nothing. "The secondary key you mentioned, we recovered it 3 weeks ago from the server cache of your handler in Zurich. Your network received the confirmation signal 11 minutes ago." I watched his face. "Not from you, from us. Every sleeper agent in the network received a message appearing to come from you, directing them to report to their immediate commanding officers for a routine security verification." I paused. "They're all in custody, Dad. It's done." The silence lasted 4 full seconds. My father, Admiral Hargrove Scott, the most controlled man I had ever known, closed his eyes. When he opened them, something had left his face. The architecture of certainty, the bedrock of a man who had believed himself invincible, had quietly given way. What remained looked tired and old, and almost, for just a moment, like the father I had loved before I understood what he was. "When did you know?" he asked softly. "I've suspected for 2 years," I said. "I confirmed it 8 months ago. The wedding was your idea. I needed you to walk me down the aisle. I needed you close enough to speak to me privately. It was the one scenario I knew you wouldn't resist." I looked at him steadily. "You always wanted to be there when you won. I used that." He nodded slowly, almost with something like admiration. "You're better than I was," he said, "at this age." "I had a good teacher," I said, and I meant it in all its complexity and grief. The lead SWAT officer stepped forward. "Admiral Scott, you are under arrest for violations of the Espionage Act, conspiracy, and related federal charges. You have the right to remain silent." "I know my rights," my father said quietly. He straightened his uniform, squared his shoulders, lifted his chin. Even now, even here, he carried himself like a man who commanded rooms. They put the handcuffs on him. He didn't look at me again as they led him down the aisle, past the stunned congregation, past the flowers and the candles and the abandoned illusion of a perfect day, past everything he had built and broken. The cathedral doors closed behind him. After the guests were evacuated. The priest sat alone in a front pew with his hands folded and his eyes closed, praying quietly. Somewhere outside, I could hear the controlled activity of a federal operation wrapping itself up, car doors, radio chatter, the machinery of justice in motion. Daniel came and stood beside me. We were both still in our wedding clothes, his dress uniform, my white silk dress, the bouquet still in my hands. The cathedral was almost empty now. Candlelight moved on the stone walls. "You okay?" he asked. "No," I said honestly, "but I will be." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "The operation is officially closed. Director Callahan wants debriefs Monday morning." "Monday," I agreed. Another silence, a comfortable one, the kind that had been building between us for months. "Emily," he turned toward me, and the performance was entirely gone now. No cover identity, no operational persona, just Daniel Reeves standing in a candlelit cathedral looking at me like I was the only real thing left in the room. "I know the timing is absurd. I know this isn't," he started again. "When I said your name this morning, before everything, I meant something by it." "I know," I said. "I want the chance to mean it outside of an operation." I looked at him for a long moment. At the man who had stood beside me through 3 years of the most complex and painful thing I had ever done. Who had known what was real between us and had waited, patiently, because the mission came first, and he respected that more than his own wants. "We have a priest," I said, "and 300 chairs." He stared at me. "Most of the flowers are still standing." I looked down at the bouquet in my hands, the white roses, the hidden drive that had carried the weight of everything. "And I'm already dressed." Daniel Reeves, intelligence officer, undercover operative, the most patient man I had ever met, broke into a smile so wide, and sudden it transformed his entire face. "You're serious," he said. "I'm a naval intelligence officer who just dismantled an 11-year espionage network on her wedding day," I said. "I'm always serious." He laughed, a real laugh, unguarded and warm, bouncing off the old stone ceiling of the cathedral. It was the best sound I had heard in 3 years. He held out his hand. I took it, and we walked back toward the altar together, not as operatives, not as cover identities, not as pieces on someone else's board, just as ourselves in the quiet aftermath of a storm we had survived. The priest opened his eyes, looked at us, looked around at the mostly empty cathedral, the evidence of a federal operation still fresh in the air. He began. "Please," I said. He stood up slowly, adjusted his vestments, and opened his book. The candles burned. Outside, the city went on. And in the ruins of my father's empire, in the silence he had left behind, I finally began to breathe. The USB drive is still in my bouquet. I kept the flowers. Some things you hold on to not because they're beautiful, but because they remind you what you survived. And what you chose after. And Lieutenant Commander Emily Scott, United States Navy Intelligence, still serving.